Welcome to the Business Interview. I'm Markus Karlsson. The mother of all firewalls, that's what the OECD wants from Eurozone leaders. The organization is calling on them to hike up the firepower of the Eurozone's permanent bailout fund to 1 trillion euros. But that is far more than what Eurozone leaders have agreed on so far. Let's listen to this from the Secretary General of the OECD.
The mother of all firewalls should be in place. Strong enough, broad enough, deep enough, tall enough, all sorts of, just big. To ensure that it does not need to be used, actually, that people know that it's there and therefore will not even attempt to either speculate or try to see if it's strong enough.
And for more now on the Eurozone's firewall, we can turn to Jörgen Elmeskov. He's the Deputy Chief Economist at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
Now, just big, that is how Angel Gurria, your boss, described the needs for the Eurozone's permanent bailout fund. What do you say to that? Do you think, indeed, that it could happen that Eurozone leaders will hike up the firepower of the European Stability Mechanism?
Let me start by saying that there is a sense that panic has disappeared from the markets right now because, in part, the ECB has pumped out a lot of liquidity. But I think one should be aware that liquidity goes only so far in dealing with problems that, to a large extent, are associated with solvency and lack of capital. And therefore, I think there are remaining risks in the euro area, and it's in that context that one needs to think about the firewall.
And that is why we need that 1 trillion euro figure.
I do not think we necessarily want to pin us down on a particular figure, but it needs to be so big that it prevents contagion.
So big that no one will ever think about attacking the Eurozone.
That is essentially it. And obviously, as you establish such a firewall, you also need to ensure that the countries that are protected by it, that they also undertake the necessary policies and they undertake the necessary reforms. So it cannot stand alone. It's part of a policy package that countries need to agree on, but it's an essential part of that package.
But if we look at this politically, Germany, for instance, has said that it could think about hiking the firepower of the European Stability Mechanism, the permanent bailout fund in the Eurozone, up to round about 700 billion euros. That falls short of what you're asking for, doesn't it?
Well, I don't think we are particularly hung up on the exact institutional setup of a firewall. And one can indeed think of different combinations from various contributors to a firewall. One has got the EFSF, one has got the ESM. There's a question as to whether there could be a role for the International Monetary Fund. There's a question as to what role the ECB could play. I frankly do not think it is so important for us what the exact institutional setup is, as it is important to have something which is so big that it is unlikely to be used.
But let me ask you this, 700 billion euros, is that going to be enough?
I don't think one can answer that question totally in the affirmative or in the negative. That will depend on circumstances. I think it would be wise to have a very sizable firewall, which might imply a total number bigger than the 700. But it can be composed, as I said, of contributions from different institutions.
That's a very diplomatic answer. Now, the OECD, in your latest report on the Eurozone economy, you say that the outlook is very much uncertain at this stage. What's the number one danger spot for you?
Well, it obviously is a return of tensions inside the euro area.
And where do you think those tensions could come from?
Well, they could come from the financial field. They could come from a government having difficulties in moving towards sustainability of public budgets. In a sense, these are the sources of risk that have been with us all the time. And I think, yes, the flames have to some extent been put out by the ECB's action, but there's still a lot of tension there, and we don't know whether the fire couldn't reignite.
Speaking of that, I want us to listen into another soundbite, this one from Italy's Prime Minister Mario Monti. He said just in the past week or so that the Eurozone debt crisis was almost over. Let's listen into his quote.
I don't see, maybe I can be wrong, I don't see flames of a crisis like we saw in the last 2 years to come up again.
All right, so once again, Italy's Prime Minister Mario Monti. What do you say about his words? When he says that the debt crisis is almost over, do you think that he's speaking too soon?
I don't think we would want to say that, at least. We would not feel confident saying so. And that comes back to the issue that I mentioned, that to a large extent what we have seen in terms of reduced panic in the markets is an outcome of the ECB pumping a lot of liquidity out, ensuring that banks are not going to have funding problems in the near future, which is very, very desirable. It's certainly been a very helpful operation.
But
in a sense, what we are saying is that this does not solve the underlying problem, which is one of sustainability and solvency.
But when you hear language like Mario Monti's, are you fearful that perhaps Eurozone politicians will take their foot off the pedal, so to speak, in order to resolve those underlying problems?
Well, now Monti, if anything, has been really putting his foot to the floor. So in this context,
pedal to the metal.
Yes, in this context, it's perhaps not the right thing to say. But in general, you're of course right that the risk is always there. That when the pressure is off, action tends to be less.
Now we're seeing new austerity measures being pushed forward by the Spanish government. Is that the right way to go at this stage, to continue with the austerity policies that we have seen in the past 2 years or so?
See, I think this is a question of degree, that Spain needs to consolidate, I think is beyond doubt. The question...
Which means consolidate to cut down on spending and the budget deficit.
Yes. The question really is how fast it should go. And clearly, last year there was an overrun, and the issue now is how quickly to get back on the track. And there, I think our view is that one wants to revert to the track, but one does not necessarily want to revert immediately to the same track.
So easy does it?
That's perhaps not the right term, because we do think that tightening is necessary, but just the extent of tightening that would be necessary to get back to the pre-agreed track would just be too much. The economy couldn't handle it.
At the same time, you're telling Eurozone countries with money, such as Germany, Finland and the Netherlands, not to tighten. Do you think they're doing that at the moment? Are you seeing signs that they are indeed tightening as well to cut down on their fiscal deficits?
There is a bit of tightening going on, but it is actually fairly modest. And they have basically all announced that they are going to let the automatic stabilizers play around the tightening path, which is appropriate. So I think they're doing the right thing. One should remember that the Eurozone, unfortunately, did not start from a situation where, on average, public budgets were balanced. One started from a situation where some countries had smaller deficits and some countries had very big deficits. And that means that for the area on average, there is a need to move towards something which is a more balanced situation.
But just very briefly here towards the end, do you think that the actions of countries like Germany, Finland and the Netherlands, will they be enough to prevent demand from falling off a cliff in the Eurozone?
See, I think the surplus countries in Europe, they have an important role to play. Perhaps not so much in terms of easing up on fiscal policy, because I don't think they would serve anybody by in a sense, misrunning their own budgets. But they would have a very important role to play by undertaking structural reforms that would boost domestic demand in their economies. That would help the weaker deficit countries, especially in the periphery, because it would boost the export market growth for those countries. And that is really what they need at this stage.
All right, it sounds from you as if we're going to live with this crisis for a while longer. Thanks very much indeed, Jørgen Elmeskov from the OECD.
Thank you for having me.
And with that, we're going to wrap up the program. Thanks for watching France 24. We have more news coming your way soon.